Alright, today we're painting up an Iron Warrior Chaos Space Marine. This is a traditionally very basic scheme, but there's a couple of freehand details we can add to this to really bump it up. The first thing that we'll need to do is go ahead and place in the color on his actual armor panels, which the Iron Warriors have a very steel, or basic steel workup. So we're going to use Vallejo metal color, airbrush color steel, and aluminium, along with some traditional Vallejo model color black. So this is a matte acrylic color, and we're going to use all three of these through the airbrush to set up the tone for our Space Marine. Again, we're going to start off with our Vallejo metal color steel. I'm going to run this through the airbrush to get a nice even coat, and we're going to want to coat the whole mini, so all armor panels and everything will be a nice even steel tone by the end of this step. Now, one thing I'm not liking about this is I've got some gaps along the top of the backpack. I'm going to use something called Bondic, which is a UV reactive resin to seal that. The nice thing about this is that it seems to bond to paint fairly easily, so if I'm in the middle of a paint job, I can throw some of this on, kind of smooth it down, and then hit it with the UV torch at the end to set it, and then immediately paint right over it. So I've got some of my steel color sitting in weight for me to finish sealing this. Let's fast forward a bit.
A little distance.
See, I'm using a knife to correct a few things here too, including the Bondic that we've sealed down, as well as any little scuffs on the paint or the miniature, and then coating it over directly with that steel color once more. Now that we've got the steel set, we're going to load up some of the metal color aluminium, and we're going to do a top-down spray of this. My airbrush clogs up just a little bit, so I need to clear the tip of here a few times, and I'm testing it out on the paper in the background to make sure I've got a nice even flow before I start. I don't want any speckling, and true metallic paints have a very bad tendency of doing so through an airbrush. So take your time. A little bit of airflow improver will help, but not too much as to break the paint itself. Once we've got it loaded, I'm going to take a top-down approach, sort of like a zenithal pre-shading, and apply that aluminium to the very topmost points of the mini itself.
A little disagreement. A strange day.
Hey, fancy and shiny. Alright, the last step that we're going to have to bring in here is taking a little bit of that Vallejo model color black. This is a matte paint. It is not a metallic paint. And we're going to go into the recesses and shadows and basically do the reverse of what we just did with the aluminium. We're going to want to get up into the crotch, the inner legs, under the arms, and the back of the head, under the backpack, and just in any crevices where light may not reach fully. Go very thin on this, very easy. the end here, you can see that I've got some bubbling in my airbrush cup. This means I have a clog or a loose seal, but I'm just about finished and looking pretty good there. Let's move on to our next step. So I mentioned earlier there's a bit of freehand that we can bring in on this mini that'll really set it apart. So we're going to start by mixing a little bit of black and a little bit of mahogany together and throwing down some base coats here on both of the shoulders as well as the bolt rifle. So I'm just using a wonky brush here to do a little bit of base coating. One shoulder will be pure black, and that will be used for the iconography, and then the other one will be hazard stripes. So we're basing that one in primarily with mahogany with just a little bit of black mixed in to make that a solid coat. You might need a few coats here to cover up the metallic from before. Just make sure it's not peeking through. We don't want a translucent effect here. Same thing goes for the rifle. There is a number of panels here that we want to bring in as black or near black, as well as adding some hazard stripes to the front panel. We'll add mahogany there. And another quick thing we'll do is add some Magimix to this. This is an equal part mix of Nuln Oil, Agrax, Earthshade, and Lahmian medium, all from Citadel. And we're going to hit all of the corners, crevices, and little details on the metallic armor. Make sure to get that into where shade should be or where anything may have settled. That slight brown in there is very important as that gives that a little bit more of a realistic look, and the Lahmian medium helps that not coffee stain so much. If you use some of the other Citadel shades, you may have noticed that, some spotting or some unevenness, that helps smooth it out just a little bit. So we're going to hit all of these cables. You might want to take a second pass at them, etc. And if you want to really grunge some things up, take another pass. Just keep going. Alright, we now have our black and brown panel set up, and we also have a good amount of shade and recess detail on the metallics. We'll just keep adding a little bit more here and there, but once we touch up these last few spots, we'll move on to doing a little bit of freehand. Alright, for the next part, we're going to break out the airbrush again. We're going to set up the hazard striping. We need to lay down some Averland Sunset over the mahogany places that we set up on the shoulder and the bolter. And if you're curious why I have bubblegum all over the mini, that's silly putty being used as an airbrushing mask. It's non-adhesive and it doesn't seem to affect the paint underneath, and any paint that's been put on it seems to be fairly well just kind of absorbed into it without any repercussions. So I've masked off parts of it just so I can get a clear angle at the bolter and the shoulder without overspraying the rest of the metallics. We're not worried about the trim here on the shoulder pad, as that's going to get painted over. Next we'll load up some golden yellow and bring up the yellow just a little bit more. Alright, we're going to get out a little bit of titanium white and mix that into our golden yellow. So we get a nice pale yellow here, and then just bring up the very top of that shoulder pad. So here's the fun part where I take off all of the silly putty, and we see what sort of result we have underneath. There's one little spot right there where I accidentally masked it off. That's okay. We're actually going to touch this back up with a little bit of brushwork. I'm going to take just a smidge of mahogany here and cover that up. We're also going to block out that yellow panel here for hazard stripes. So I'm starting up on my stripes here, and I'm doing these all freehand. So I'm setting up the first stripe here. I'll get a nice width on it, leaving a little bit of yellow before and after it, and then I'm basically just going to try my best to make sure that each one is even. Always use less of your stripe color, in this case the black, so I can always go over more of the yellow. It's much harder to add the yellow undercoat in later if I make a mistake than it is to add a little bit more black to even things up. You can see I'm just touching these up a little bit here, a little bit there, taking my time and going through and making sure they're even. The evenness is more important than anything, and the size of the stripes is really irrelevant. It's really just however big you want them. Once I'm happy with the stripes, what I'm going to do is block in the rest of the bolter with a little bit of black and even everything up here. Alright, now for a quick dash of gray blue on the black shoulder before we finish up with the entirety of our airbrushing. This is going to be our last airbrush step, period. But we're also going to use some of that gray blue as some highlights later. And here's where we're at. So I lied. One last little touch with the airbrush. We're going to get out some mahogany and touch up the very bottom of that panel there, that yellow. Alright, we're ready to do some more striping. Let's get out some matte black. This time we're using the Army Painter matte black, and we're going to start laying down those stripes. This is basically the same technique that we did before on the front of the bolter. We're going to make an initial stripe, and that will be the basis for the rest of them. Remember to add more black as you go to thicken up the lines, just a little bit at a time. You want to make sure that the lines are even and evenly spaced. You also want to make sure, because we're working on a curved surface, that you maintain as much straightness as you can as you wrap around the surface based on perspective. Although that may be a little bit off by the end of it, that's okay. Whatever looks best is what's right here. Alright, this last Little bit of hazard striping. We're just bringing in some details, trying to touch it up, adding a little bit of black here, a little bit of black there, making sure that the yellow and black stripes both are even. Now that we're happy with our stripes, we're going to go back to our gray blue, and we're going to use this as an edge highlight along the bolter to bring out some edges and some details. Another quick thing you can do to add a little bit of extra detail is actually shade the black on your hazard stripes by giving it just a little bit of that gray blue along the edges to give it a bit of depth, a bit of shine. I'm going to use a quick dab of burnt red and bold Pyrrol red to hit the eye lenses. We need to add some true metallic gold into the scheme, so we're going to use a two-part process here. We're going to start with using Darkstar Regency Gold, and then we'll move on to using Darkstar Renaissance Gold for highlights. We've skipped ahead quite a bit, but I've applied spot highlights to the very tops of the bolts and the tops of the gold areas that are showing. And right now I'm going back and using some of that matte black that we had on our palette to get some edge highlights, or actually edge downlights into the recesses here.
I want to know. A strange day.
And of course our old friend Magimix is going to show up again. Again, this is Nuln Oil, Agrax, Earthshade, and Lahmian Medium mixed together. We're going to use that to get into some of the recesses and around the bolts here on the shoulder pad trim.
A strange day.
And I'll keep applying that to other areas as well as I see fit. Use up as much of that Magimix as possible and really enforce those shadows.
A strange day.
Here's where we bring in some more of that Renaissance gold for highlights. We're going to hit the very top edges again. So I'm not very good with this, but we need to apply a decal here. I've got one of the newer Iron Warrior decals out from the 2016 sheet, and what I'm going to do here is inundate it with water until it's soft enough to actually take off of the transfer paper.
A strange day.
I actually end up struggling with this one quite a bit to get it off of the paper. Just be very careful that you don't tear it. Decals are made from a very fragile material. I believe it's mostly made of dextrose. Alright, once we have the decal itself ready, we lay down some micro salt underneath, directly on the paint, and we lay that down and try to get that as flat as possible and in the correct positioning before we leave it to dry. I fuss around with it quite a bit, but be very careful while you do so. You could end up tearing the decal at this stage. Once everything's dried and the decal's in position, I'm going to use a layer of Lahmian medium directly applied over the decal to help flatten it out in the overall scheme. I'm literally just adding some depth to the paint, and Lahmian medium is clear. And once this is done and dry, we need to throw this guy on a base. So I've got an old throwaway secret weapon base that we paint up very quickly, just like this. Shazam. And I dropped a pin through his leg as well as the base. Just a single pin through one foot and leg and into the base. Everything is finalized here. All we have left to do is give this a clear coat. Now, with true metals, you can preserve the luster of the metal by applying a gloss coat, but we want a matte tone here overall, and this is going to knock down the luster of the overall paint job. This is on purpose, but may not be the result you desire. So let's see what we end up looking at. We've used Model Master's flat coat, and this is a Tester's brand, and this has flattened down the paint job quite a bit. So this is the overall finished look of the model. If you like what I've done, we'll be putting together another video for you next week, as well as doing some live streaming over the weekend. You can catch me here on YouTube as well as on Twitch. It's been a blast. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and have some fun out there painting.